Yeah. Hello. Welcome to the show. Don't do it like Joe. All about family, friends, football, and Forex. Today, we have the honor to have here Nick Leeson. Hi, Nick. How are you? And how is it going there?
Yeah, I'm good, Joe. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you. Hey, look, we haven't met in person yet, but I have watched a lot of documentaries of you, a lot of YouTube, anything. Uh, what are you doing now? Like after all?
Well, I still trade, Joe, so I'm watching the screens at the moment. So I think once you've worked in the financial markets for a period of time, it's difficult to leave them alone. You're always interested, and you have an eye on things that are going on. So I still do that, and I'm still trading. But hopefully a little bit better than I was years ago. Anyway.
Nice one. So, talking about 1995.
Hmm.
Uh, so, you were how old then?
In 1995, I would have been 28.
28. So,
Yeah.
when did you enter in the financial industry actually? Pretty young then.
Yeah, I left school. I left school at the age of 18, so straight into the city of London. Then, so I didn't go. I didn't go to university. It was just straight into Lombard Street at the time.
Okay. And you started immediately as a trader, or how did that go that you come to
No,
Singapore? Yeah.
I started work for Coots and Company, which is a retail bank. It's a very exclusive retail bank. It's the Queen's Bank in England as well. So, I started there, and obviously was very interested in everything that was going on in the markets at the time. It was the Big Bang era, so things were changing very quickly. There was lots of opportunity, lots of new jobs, lots of big banks coming into the city. So people, you could always there was more demand for people than there was supply, I suppose, at the time. So it was quite easy to move around and move onwards or upwards. So I worked for Coots for a couple of years in Lombard Street. Then I was headhunted to Morgan Stanley, and then from Morgan Stanley was headhunted to Barings. That was kind of, the way that it was. And I don't know if it was by luck or by design. I started to specialize in futures and options, and that was, it was a sought after field at the time.
So you were more or less like 23, 24 years old as you joined the Barings, or even before?
Uh, yeah, probably a little bit younger than that, Joe. So I was 18 when I started in the city. I was 20 when I was working at Morgan Stanley, and then probably just about 22 when I started with Barings, which would have been in Portsoken Street. So, it was a different world. I traveled extensively. I was in Japan. I worked in Indonesia. I've been in Japan twice, I suppose. I was in Hong Kong. So for a good period, I enjoyed a good amount of success within the organizations that I work for.
Exciting life for a young fellow. And then you came to Singapore.
Yeah.
And then you took quite a responsible position as a trader, right? Mainly futures and options.
Yeah, well, we were upgrading our membership of the Singapore International Monetary Exchange at the time. So, that was the primary focus of moving to Singapore, and then they were looking for somebody to run that operation. So prior to me going to Singapore, I'd been offered a position in Sydney, working on the Sydney Futures Exchange. So it was, yeah, look, it was everything I was looking for, but probably not everything that I was ready for at that
Yep.
particular time. A combination of age and not having the necessary management expertise, and being relatively immature from a business perspective as well. I think a combination of all of those led to some fairly stupid decision making during that period, which ultimately led to the collapse of the bank.
Wow. Myself, I have read your book, Rouge Trader,
Yeah.
15 years ago, 15 years or something like this.
Okay.
And I was at that time in Asia as well. So I felt really how you must have felt. I mean,
sure you didn't, Joe. I'm sure it was.
Okay.
I'm sure it was very different.
Before I ask you more questions, Nick, one question. Like, I know a lot about your case because I read the book, I have informed myself properly. But one thing, what I haven't found is, where was the risk management of a 200-year-old bank? Where were they?
Oh, they didn't have one. I think, it's difficult to recount everything, with complete 2020 vision these days. But, I think there was one risk manager. Barings was about 2,500 people at the time, working in far-flung locations, so Indonesia and Korea and places like that. But as far as I can remember, there was one risk manager who was probably the compliance officer as well. Back in the day, it was everything was about making money. Controls and systems. They were a headache for people. They weren't something that people encouraged. I think that's one way that the world has changed or the financial world has changed over the last 20, 30 years. They were an encumbrance. Nobody really wanted them. So, if you could get people to double job, people did, and risk and compliance at Barings was one of those areas. And I
Incredible.
think, I read something recently that if you go into Citibank in the city of London these days, there's 3,500 people working in compliance. So,
yes.
So it's a completely different environment where the focus is more correct than it was back in the 90s.
Maybe it's because of you.
I think I don't want to take all the credit, but I think it did start to change things. And obviously, since that time, you've had other financial scandals, and you've had the financial collapse.
Yes.
So things had to change.
Yes, and now it has definitely changed. I can confirm that. Yes. Now, thinking back of these years, like where it started, you traded, you had this account 5-digit 8 where you put some trades in, and did you have any moment during being so busy with trading where you thought you may commit a crime, or did you just see yourself as a reckless trader or a high risk taking trader?
I saw myself, I suppose, Joe, if I'm being honest, as somebody who was a little bit out of their depth and was struggling and couldn't, I couldn't face my own failure. And I certainly couldn't enunciate it and tell people around me what was going on. So, as much as the communication and the controls within the system or within the bank were poor, I wasn't sharing what I was experiencing with other people. I wasn't doing simple things like asking for help and advice, and that ultimately all of that led to part of the collapse of the bank. But for me, it was not being able to deal with failure. And I was young. I was used to succeeding, and here I was in a situation where, rather than deal with it, I was just postponing the realization of my own failure, because that was the one thing I couldn't really, put my hand up and say, look, this is wrong and I can't cope with it.
And then one day, then in Frankfurt, you found yourself arrested all of a sudden. How did that feel? Did you think, oh, it's just a day or two maybe, and then you walk out again? Or did you already feel you did something bad?
Oh no, you definitely. At that stage, I knew. When I fled Singapore and I was in Kota Kinabalu, which is where I went before on a fairly circuitous route, I ended up back in Germany. the story started to unfold. So that you know that the bank has collapsed. I didn't understand that was going to be the outcome, but you knew it by that stage. So you know you're not there for a couple of days, and you just want to focus on trying to work out how long it's going to be. So, you know, whether it's and lawyers will give you different opinions. I think lawyers more often than not tell you what you want to hear. But I had a very good lawyer who told me the truth, and you know, from the beginning, I probably understood that it was a 5-6 year period, and then it's about trying to get your head mentally prepared for that length of time, which is tough. And you know, the conditions in Germany are much fairer than they are in Singapore. Singapore's a very tough environment. So, you know, but it got me ready for it, I suppose.
You must have been incredibly strong mentally at that time already. I mean, sitting in a courtroom and hearing the judge telling you the sentence. What did you feel at that moment?
Well, it was, look, it goes back to, it was ballpark, I suppose. That's the only way I can explain it. You know, I'd been told by my English lawyer to expect, we knew the maximum was 8 years. So that was the worst that it could be. And so you mentally, you get used to the fact that it could be 8 years. So 6.5 years was a little bit better. It could have been better still. You know, mentally you were prepared for that. So,
wow.
So it was ballpark.
Okay. And then how were you got in prison, Chiang Mai, or what's his name? What's the name?
It's reported sometimes I was in Changi, but I wasn't. I was in a place
Changi, yeah.
I was in a place called Tanah Merah, which is next door. It's a maximum security prison.
Tanah Merah, easy to remember, like the Panamera of Volkswagen. A bit of advertising for them. No, just kidding. Now you are in Tanah Merah. How were your roommates and how was the food there?
Well, your roommates are all triad gang members, so it's everybody in Singapore prison is a triad gang member. If you're not, when you get there, you have to align. So that I didn't have to do that. So it's very hierarchical. It's you know, the triad gangs have a general, they have fighters down the bottom. So you know, it's you have to learn how to behave. But I'd lived in Asia for a long time at that stage, Joe. So you know, I knew the concept of face, and I knew how to behave, and you know, approach people and such like. So it was okay. But you know, the funny side of it, if you like, is that they all believed that I stole $2 billion. So they thought I was this, you know, real big criminal mastermind. And for that reason, I had a degree of status within the prison as well, which was weird, but it allowed you to survive. So, you know, I didn't embellish the story, but I didn't really contradict it either, because it was, you know, it meant that people were at arm's length, and, you know, I was safe.
Now, that means, because my wife is also Malaysian and I'm very much in Asia very often as well. So the rules, like what apply outside of prison, they also help a bit in prison. Is that right then?
Yeah. You, I mean,
respect the elderly, respect the elderly, for example.
In Singapore prison, there's not too many elderly. You know, they unfortunately, it's what happens is that you know, the majority of people in Singapore prison were there for drug offences, and they recommit. And eventually, after you commit enough times and you're carrying enough drugs, then you get hung. So the prison population is very young. Now, I only have one place to compare it against, which is Frankfurt. When I was in Hearst prison in Frankfurt, and the population there was significantly older. But in Singapore, in the prison that I was in, you know, the age is very young, and some of them have very, very long sentences as well.
Wow. Okay, before we move on, last question to prison. I mean, how is it? Like, you get up in the morning and then you're locked up the whole day, and then you have 1 hour with your roommates, or do you have a kind of a canteen where you mingle? How is that? Nobody knows, I guess.
There's no canteen, Joe. You sound like my Singaporean lawyer who told me that there was going to be, there was going to be karaoke and there was going to be all these sort of great things before I went back there. No, he was full of something that I won't mention now. But no, it's the cell is 6 foot by 9 foot. There are 3 of you in the cell, so there's not a lot of room. There's a hole in the floor where you go to the toilet. There's a little pipe that comes out of the wall where you can shower if you have water. It's very clean, and the inmates keep the cells very clean because otherwise you get skin disease. So you're very conscious that you clean the cells every day. It's very hot, so it's 100 degrees when you wake up in the morning. It's even hotter in the evening because the heat rises. So when you get frustrated mentally, or you're thinking or worrying about something, it kind of increases the pressure that you're under. So you get woken up at 7 o'clock in the morning. You get given your breakfast, which is in the cell. So in the morning you're given 3 pieces of bread, and they either has butter on it, or it has jam on it, or it has something called kaya, which you might be aware of.
Of course, of course.
Okay, so those are the 3 things, and it alternates. Kaya's pretty depressing. But you don't get a great deal of the jam or the kaya on it anyway. And then you get tea or coffee. The tea was okay. The coffee was appalling. And then you get your hour outside, and then you're locked. So you exercise for the hour, or I just used to run for an hour. The exercise area is the size of a basketball court. And I just used to run around that. You don't have trainers or anything, so you run in your bare feet. So it's hot, so your feet blister for a good period of time until they toughen up. And then you go back to your cell after the hour. I would continue exercising. Then we would clean the cell, and then lunch would be delivered, which would be rice and either chicken or fish. And then some vegetable that doesn't really have a name, but it was it's pretty nasty.
Green color.
It was green. Yeah, it was usually green, but it was nasty. It wasn't anything green that I could describe to you. But and then in the afternoon you would maybe read if you had a book or a magazine, and then you would get your dinner about 4 o'clock. Which again would be rice, and maybe sometimes you would get mutton, or you might get chicken, and then but it wouldn't be a nice piece of chicken. It would be the bum or the wing or something like that. So, but you kind of you expect that. And the one thing, for even though I've lived in Asia for probably 5 years up until that point, it's very difficult to eat rice twice a day. And it takes a long time to get used to that. So in the morning I would keep my bread and I would keep my rice, and for some of the Asian people, they wouldn't eat their bread in the morning, so we would swap it, and I might have some bread to eat in the evening. But yeah, it was like that for I was in prison in Singapore for nearly 4 years, so for 2 years it was like that. And then I was given a bit of work where I was working in a workshop that made clothes for school children. So that was the.
Well, okay, but you are in a single cell, or are you together with others in the cell?
There was 3 people. So there was 2. The other guys would be triad gang. They'd come from different triad gangs, so they would distrust each other. After about 3 or 4 weeks, there would be a fight, and then one of them would have to leave.
I see. And you were a bit of litigator and a diplomat and a bit of.
No, I let them fight.
Okay, good.
Now you can't get involved.
Would you consider these 4 years as your worst period of life?
It was I mean, mentally, it was very, very tough, Joe. Was it the worst period? You know, to a certain degree, I think the period before was the worst period because, you know, that's the period of failure. And, you know, I think obviously I had cancer whilst I was in prison in Singapore as well. And I think that period, you know, 3 years prior to me going to jail in Singapore was probably the period that made me ill as well. So I'm not sure it was necessarily the worst. It was the hardest from you know, surviving and trying to get through a 4.5 year period. It was tough.
All right. Then the day you came, basically, you got released July 1999.
Correct.
3rd of July.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I arrived back on the 4th, so it was Independence Day.
Independence Day. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was the first few things you did after you came back?
I don't think that's for public consumption, Joe. But well, the truth is, so it wasn't anything like that. But the truth is that the Daily Mail were doing a week-long series of interviews with me. So from the moment I arrived in Heathrow Airport, the first thing that happened was the liquidators gave me an injunction for £100 million. And then I issued an apology at the airport, and then the Daily Mail took me through a back door and they took me to a house in East Uckfield, which is in Sussex. And then we were in this house for 5 or 6 days, hidden away from the world, so that they could do their interviews.
Wow. So it was not like as I imagined. I mean, fish and chips and English breakfast and beers non-stop and stuff like that.
Not quite, no. But they did. Every evening they went out to the takeaways and they would get food and they would bring it back and there would be a few beers and friends were allowed to visit, but it was all very secretive.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Well, I wish I could hear that full story of these 5-6 days. Sounds interesting. Yeah.
It was different.
Now, long time has passed by.
Yeah.
What have you done since? I mean, you are a public speaker. You give you give some interviews. What has happened since significant? What you want to mention of your career?
Yeah, I suppose I don't really view it as a career anymore, Joe. But yeah, I do a lot of after dinner speaking, and I talk at a lot of conferences. So and the subject matter changes. So you know, recently I've been doing some stuff in-house at banks where they're looking at mental health, and you know, people obviously face a lot of different difficulties during their business careers, and you know, my fundamental piece of advice for everybody is always to ask for help, because you're surrounded by people who can help you, who've been in a similar situation, and they've chosen the right path, and I didn't. And you know, both from an organizational perspective and from a personal perspective, that ended up in a lot of heartache, really, and it's easily avoided. But if people can just communicate better, and tell people what they're feeling, and you know, banks have obviously improved significantly over the last few decades, both from a control and risk management perspective, but also from, you know, trying to listen to their staff and empower their people. And I think there's a long way to go. So I do a lot of that. I still trade, as I said. So you know, I have a business that looks at some of the psychological difficulties people have in not taking losses and in not triggering stops. There's a whole new world of retail traders who are quite active and don't necessarily have the skill set or the expertise. Expertise isn't even the right word. It's they don't have the experience of some of the situations that you might have faced, that I might have faced from trading the markets, and they freeze and they don't deal with the situation, and that's why I believe a lot of retail traders end up losing money. You know, experience is hard earned, unfortunately.
So you trade right now for a company or for yourself or manage current funds?
No, for
Huh?
me, Joe. No, for
Okay.
me.
Not for
So
you?
yeah, no, it's definitely for me. So, I trade. I probably trade three or four different markets. So I trade the Dow, I trade the DAX, and a bit of gold. So it's for my personal account, and I show my trades to the market, and I try to explain to people why I do what I do when I do, and so there's a bit of
Okay.
mental involved in it.
Is that basically, I saw your YouTube channel and I like the videos actually. They're very nice to watch.
Yeah.
Uh, is that just educational purpose, or are you doing this also to attract maybe some investors, or what's the idea behind it?
Yeah, not really investors, Joe. The I mean, I'm sure we'd come up against a lot of regulatory red tape if I tried to attract investors. No, it's more from an educational perspective, because and if somebody, there's been an explosion in retail trading from a CFD perspective, and now we've got this Robin Hood investing that's going on in the US as well, and I think people unfortunately get lured in by the prospect of easy money, or quick money, and there isn't any. You need to do the hard work as well. And so, in terms of steering people and sharing some of my experiences, I think that's what you'll see on the video. I don't trade around numbers because it's just a toss of a coin, really, and there's
Yeah,
more often than not, they're already written into the market. So let the move happen and then trade after that. But I
I
don't always follow my own advice. That's the problem.
well, you are on your own money, so you can do whatever you feel like, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
yes, and what I have seen, you have been profitable every week since May or March.
Yeah,
Uh,
not last week, but
oh, I missed
I
that one. I missed that one. Yeah.
well, I lost a bit of money last week, Joe. So it's been good. The one thing that I'm quite desensitized to the market, so I'm not somebody who panics. And I think when the markets are flying around with a bit of volatility and you've got big intraday swings, people do panic. So I don't panic. Sometimes I might hold a trade a little bit too long, but it's in the context of how the week is going. So yeah, no, it's been good so far.
Yeah. Listen to your story, Nick. I think you anyway feel like a bit reborn. You have been dead already, and now you're reborn. So you don't panic so easy, like other people. Maybe that helps. Now, um, do you like? Don't do it like Joe. We started that blog or vlog, how you want to call it, also for educational purposes in the financial markets,
Sure.
and also based on Chuck Ma, who is also Asian's principle, that other people, our viewers here, can learn from our guest speakers and from myself sometimes. Yeah. Apart from the advice what you already gave, that when you have problems at work, you should speak, you should look for advice, internal. Do you have any other valuable additional advice you would like to give our viewers when you look back through your life? It's now what 50 plus, more or less years. Any advice you would like to mention here?
Well, I think that's the most important one, the one we've mentioned already. I think as well, there's probably a couple of other things as well. A good friend of mine who runs a major bank uses my story to explain to people that they shouldn't be frightened of making mistakes. And he doesn't encourage them, but he wants the communication within the organization and within the individuals to be better. Whilst he says, you will make mistakes, but what I don't want you to do is to hide them. And I think the more that people can communicate better about everything in their life doesn't necessarily become easier, but it becomes easier to deal with. And I was quite introvert. I didn't share my experiences or anything that was going wrong with me at the time. Exactly the same with cancer. I didn't really understand it, and you learn and you empower yourself. And I don't think there's anything that's so bad that you need to be frightened about it so that you don't deal with it. It's important that you deal with things quickly, and that only comes through educating yourself and empowering yourself a little bit more. And I'm kind of living proof of that, I suppose.
Very good. You, Nick, you are now a father of 3 kids.
Sure.
And I think they profit as well from your experience and from your way how you handle things. I'm so happy I had you on my show, Nick. I wish you all the best, health-wise and business-wise, and let's keep touch. Thank you very much, Nick.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.